Okay, everyone, it's 3 o'clock. Let's get started with the last talk of the session, which will be given by Chenyi Zhang on the hardness of learning ground state entanglement of geometrically local Hamiltonians.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. This is a joint work with Adam Bouland and Jack Zhou. In this work, we asked the following problem. What is the entanglement structure of the ground state of a geometrically local Hamiltonian? This is a frequently asked question in quantum information because structures like error law would tell you that you can simulate this Hamiltonian using classical algorithms. Condensed matter physicists also care about this problem because entanglement structures can be hallmarks of phases of matter. There has been a lot of results regarding this problem. For example, in the case where the spectral gap is a constant, the entanglement structure turns out to be relatively simple. To be more specific, Hastings proved an error law for the entanglement for gap 1D Hamiltonians. This result was further extended to gap frustration-free 2D Hamiltonians later by Anshu, Arat, and Gosset. But what about more general Hamiltonians? Say they don't have a constant spectral gap, but the spectral gap can be kind of small, say inverse polynomially small in terms of the number of qubits. It turns out that this problem can be much harder. So this more general small spectral gap case is what we consider in this work, where we investigate the learning ground state entanglement structure problem. Given the classical description of a geometrically local Hamiltonian, how hard is it to determine how entangled its ground state is? Informally, we show that even if we only want to distinguish between the ground states with near error law entanglement and near volume law entanglement, which is kind of the two extremes of the entanglement structure you can think of, this task is still cryptographically hard. This means that if we can solve this problem efficiently, we would break some kind of hardness assumptions in crypto that are widely believed to be true. This generalizes and improves the prior work by Bouland, Pfefferman, Gauch, Metger, Vazirani, Zhang, and Zhou that first proposed a weaker version of this problem where the Hamiltonian do not have geometric locality. I also want to briefly comment on the comparison between this result and the very nice result presented in last talk. So I think these two results, they consider very similar problems with the difference that our results considers not only local, but geometric local Hamiltonians. Also, the entanglement gap is across all the cuts instead of one fixed cut. But there comes with the cost that our hardness result is based on some crypto hardness assumptions, where their result does not. Okay, before giving the formal definition, I wanted to go through some concepts that you might already be kind of familiar with. So suppose we have this Hamiltonian that acts on n qubits on the line. We call it to be a local Hamiltonian if it can be decomposed into the sum of a series of terms, where each term only acts on the constant number of qubits. However, these qubits can be very far away from each other. For example, we might have this red term that acts on the two endpoints of this Hamiltonian. Acting on the two endpoints of the n qubits. So as you may think, such terms might be a little bit hard to realize in physics. So we have this stronger notion of geometrically local Hamiltonian, where we require that each term of the Hamiltonian can only act on a constant number of neighboring qubits. And as a disclaimer, in this work, whenever we talk about Hamiltonians, we use the qubit model instead of qubits, where the local dimension is not 2, but some relatively large constant. Okay, the next concept is about error law versus volume law. We consider an n-qubit state psi and any cut through this state. So we call this quantum state psi to has error law entanglement if the entanglement for any cut is upper bounded by some constant times the area of the cut, where this area just means the qubits that are on the boundary of the bipartition. So further, we call this near error law entanglement if the coefficient here is not a constant but some polylogarithmic vector. For this very specific bipartition that's shown in the red rectangular, we can see that the area is just 2, so the upper bound, the near error law upper bound for this case is just polylog n. On the contrary, we have this concept of volume law entanglement. We call this state psi has volume law entanglement if for any cut, the entanglement is lower bounded by some constant times the volume of the cut, which means the number of qubits on each side of the bipartition. Further, we introduced this near volume law notation where this coefficient here is not a constant, but some 1 over polylogarithmic factor. One very famous example for these volume law states are just like hard random states. So for this very specific rectangular cut, we consider, say, if it contains a constant proportion of the n qubits, the lower bound here is n over polylog n. Okay, after introducing this concept, we can give a formal definition about the problem we study, learning ground state entanglement structure, or LGSES in short. Given the classical description of a geometrically local Hamiltonian, determine whether its ground state has near volume law entanglement or near area law entanglement, assuming one of the two cases holds. Our first main result is about the 1D setting where the Hamiltonian acts on n qubits that are on the line. We show that LGSES in 1D is hard for classical algorithms, assuming factoring is hard. To be more precise, we use this decisional composite residuosity assumption, which is a standard hardness assumption in classical crypto based on discrete log and factoring. Our second main result discusses the 2D setting where the Hamiltonian acts on qubits that are on the 2D grid. We show that in this case, LGSES is hard even for quantum algorithms, assuming the learning with error problem, or LWE, is hard. To be more precise, we use the sub-exponential LWE assumption, saying that LWE is secure against any sub-exponential time quantum algorithm. In the rest of the talk, I'll give an overview on how to obtain these results, especially the one-dimensional one. There are two main building blocks for our results. The first building block is a set of quantum states whose entanglement are difficult to estimate, even if you're given the quantum Turing machine preparing them. Not only the oracle access, but also you can just have the full classical description of this quantum Turing machine. Then this can be combined with our second building block, which contains a series of techniques on how to construct Hamiltonians out of quantum Turing machines, which is pioneered by this cornerstone work by Gottesman and Irani. We'll begin by illustrating the first building block, which is known as public key pseudo-entanglement. This concept of public key pseudo-entanglement first appeared in a work by Zhou and Hoban, and is formally defined later by Bouland, Pfefferman, Gauss, Mecker, Vasarani, Zhang, and Zhou. It refers to two families of m-qubit quantum circuits, CK low and CK high. They are parameterized by some crypto, for some key from some crypto primitive, such that these two set of circuits satisfies the following two conditions. Firstly, output states of all the circuits in CK low have low entanglement or near area law entanglement. On the contrary, the output states of all the CK high circuits, they have volume law entanglement. The second requirement corresponds to the pseudo part in the name of this concept. We require that given the classical description of a circuit, even if you're promised that it is either in CK low or CK high, but distinguishing between these two cases is cryptographically hard. To prove the hardness of learning ground state entanglement structure, a very natural idea is to combine these public key pseudo-entanglement constructions with a Kitaev clock, which allows you to obtain Hamiltonians that encodes the public key pseudo-entanglement circuits. This natural idea was actually already been explored in prior work by Zhou and Huben, as well as the prior work by Bouland et al. In particular, the later work showed that this LGSES is hard for 1D local Hamiltonians. But this approach does not yield very strong results for geometrically local Hamiltonians. The reason is that Kitaev clock and its variants are designed to prove the QMA hardness of ground state energy problem, where the main focus here is to really focus on the spectral gap of the Hamiltonian instead of the entanglement structure of the ground state. So as a result, these constructions either do not preserve the entanglement structure of the encoding circuits well, or they do not have geometric locality. To address this issue, in our work, we take an alternative approach where we use the quantum Turing machine model instead of quantum circuits. Okay, as you might already know, this quantum Turing machine model is a very cumbersome one compared to circuits. You need to deal with a lot of details. But at the cost of being more technically heavy, we got the advantage to utilize a line of work pioneered by Gottesman and Irani that allows us to construct Hamiltonians out of quantum Turing machines. So these tools are similar to QIP clocks, were initially developed to prove the QMA hardness results of ground state energy problems. But using the quantum Turing machine model, this construction can show the ground state energy problem to be QMA hard for translationally invariant Hamiltonians. To be more specific, suppose we're given a quantum Turing machine with time complexity t. This construction will give you a t-qubit Hamiltonian that is geometrically local and translationally invariant, whose ground states encodes the entire running history of the quantum Turing machine. Okay, this is just a bit of like literature review, but not the reason we're using this construction. The reason is that we observed that this construction preserves entanglement structure much better than QIP clock. Then, with this observation, the high-level idea of our work is pretty clear. We want to try to construct a quantum Turing machine for public key pseudo-entangled states, and then we use this Gottesman-Irani construction to create a Hamiltonian whose ground states encode them by padding the quantum Turing machine with enough identity operation at the very end. However, a lot of challenges emerge when we're trying to implement this idea. Firstly, obviously, we need to give a quantum Turing machine construction for public key pseudo-entanglement. This is very tedious and requires us to modify a lot of details. But OK, this is still doable with enough time and care. But also we have the second problem. So the public key pseudo-entanglement constructions, they are based on some crypto primitives. That means that there must be a crypto key like inside this construction. We need to somehow hard-code this key into the Hamiltonian. To do that, we need to modify the Gottesman-Irani construction, and this modification essentially breaks the translational invariance property, but the geometric locality property is preserved. Okay, unfortunately, this is still not the end of the story, but we got a bigger problem that the entanglement is diluted throughout the way. So what do I mean by diluted? So just recall that this Gottesman-Irani construction will give you a Hamiltonian with size t, where t is the time complexity. So in all the prior pseudo-entanglement constructions, this time complexity is polynomial in terms of the number of qubits, where this polynomial is actually rather large. So the entanglement gap we obtain, the ground state is still n versus polylog n, but now the volume, the number of qubits in the Hamiltonian, is some polynomial, meaning that the net entanglement gap in terms of the number of qubits is inverse polynomially small, which is way smaller than the area law versus volume law gap that we want. So you might guess I'm going to say that we come up with a near linear time pseudo-entanglement construction, but actually we did try that, but that turns out to be super hard. So instead, we keep modifying the Gottesman-Irani construction to have a more compact Hamiltonian construction, where now its size is S, the space complexity. Okay, this is much better than before because the space complexity in pseudo-entanglement constructions are usually much better than the time complexity, but still not the end of the story because the space complexity in the prior work is of order n cubed due to the n-independent LWE-based hash function in their construction, where each of these LWE-based hash function has key size n squared. So if we directly use this construction, the entanglement gap is still n versus polylog, but now the volume is proportional to n cubed, and the net entanglement in terms of the number of qubits is inverse cubically small. To address this issue, our key technical contribution is a new space-efficient construction of pseudo-entanglement with space complexity n times some polylog factor. Our new construction contains polylog n number of independent DCRA-based hash functions, where each of these DCRA-based hash function has key size n. We also show that other arithmetic operations use space at most n times polylog n. So as we recall, this DCRA is an assumption in classical crypto against classical algorithms. So combining these with the quantum Turing machine to Hamiltonian construction will imply the classical hardness of distinguishing between near area law and volume law entanglement in one dimension. So how does our space-efficient pseudo-entanglement work? The starting point is still the binary phase state developed by Zhou and Song, just as the prior works on pseudo-entanglement did. So we have this psi to be a superposition over all the computational basis state, and there's a coefficient that's going to be either +1 or -1 in front. So the thing we do is we wanted to play with this phase function p to achieve the desired entanglement structure. We can first start with a simple case where we consider there are n qubits. We only care about the entanglement structure between the qubits from A and B and the rest of the system, but we don't care about the entanglement of any other bipartitions. So for this simpler case, what we can do is that we define P to be this function, where H is a hash function acting on qubits from A to B, and after that we apply a four-wise independent function F acting on all the qubits. So if you're not familiar with the concept of four-wise independent function, you can think of it to be something that is like random enough. Prior works in pseudo-entanglement shows that if you define P to be this function on the left, if this hash function H is injective, the entanglement between A and B and the rest of the system is lower bounded by B minus A, which is volume law entangled. But if this H has a very small image size, say 2 to the polylog n, then the entanglement is upper bounded by polylog n, which is a near area law entanglement. To extend this construction to hold for all the cuts, for all the possible cuts, what we do is we, instead of only applying one hash function, we apply a bunch of hash functions in a tree-like structure, where you can see that like higher the hash function is, it has like larger its domain size is. And just similarly as before, after that we apply a four-wise independent function F on the top. So in this work, we showed that we define this phase function P to be the function on the left. If every of the hash function is injective, the resulting state has volume law entanglement. But on the other hand, if every hash function has image size upper bounded by 2 to the polylog, this size is near area law entangled. The technical challenges related to proving this theorem is we need to show that these hash functions, they can work together to preserving the entanglement structure of a very specific cut, but they don't mess up each other when they are combined together. Also, we need to show that these hash functions on each layer can share the same key so that the overall key size is upper bounded by n log n, and so does the overall space complexity. I'll briefly mention that how to lift this construction to the two-dimensional case. Suppose we want to have a Hamiltonian acting on the n by n grid. What we do is that we design the ground state to look like this. It looks a little bit scary, but actually it's very simple. It's just a sort of superposition over these two states. And the first state is you put n copies of the one-dimensional state like horizontally. And the second state is just you put n copies of the 1D state like vertically, and then you do a superposition, and that's it. The key observation is that the volume or the size of a Hamiltonian is now n squared instead of n, so we can tolerate an n squared of space complexity. This allows us to use LWE-based hash functions so that we can achieve the hardness not only against classical algorithms, but also against quantum algorithms. Okay, let me sum up. In this work, we consider the learning ground state entanglement structure problem, or LGSES, given a classical description of a geometrically local Hamiltonian, determining whether its ground state has near volume law entanglement or near area law entanglement. Our main result is that this problem in 1D is as hard as factoring, and in 2D is as hard as breaking LWE. Our main technique is a new space-efficient public key pseudo-entanglement construction combined with a modified quantum tree machine to Hamiltonian construction. Okay, a couple of open questions here. Firstly, as I mentioned before, our construction breaks the translation invariance property in the original Goldman-Irani construction, which makes our Hamiltonian less physical than we desire. So I think it would be really great if we can have a better construction that fixes this. Secondly, our current 1D result is only for classical algorithms. So we're wondering if we can show a 1D hardness result even against quantum algorithms. Or more interestingly, can we have an efficient quantum algorithm that solves this problem in 1D, this would imply that LGSES is intrinsically different in 1D and 2D. The last question is about the possible connection between our work and condensed matter theory. We're wondering if it is possible to derive some hardness results in learning, say, gapless phases of matter or other problems in condensed matter physics based on the construction we have. Okay, that's the end of my talk, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Questions? We have plenty of time.
Hi, thank you for your interesting talk. I have a question. Have you thought about upper bounds on this LGSES problem? Maybe QMA or P-space?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We haven't gone so far along that direction, but I totally agree with you. That's totally worth investigating.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for this talk. I'm trying to think through the implications of this. So yeah, let's say one could prove, say that in 2D that a spectral gap implies area law. Then, yeah, what does this say?
Oh, I think the 2D results with spectral gap implying area law works for the case where the spectral gap is a constant.
Yeah.
But if the spectral gap is smaller, say it's inverse polynomial in terms of the size of the Hamiltonians, we show that this problem becomes much harder. Yeah.
Yeah. Also wondering about the connection with Adam's other talk on locating an entanglement, and if those results could work to detect low entanglement as well and not just unentanglement. Yeah, can you comment on putting those two together?
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting direction that we actually had tried something before, but it turns out that it's kind of hard to combine them because, like intuitively, I feel like the hardness of the problem is very different when the entanglement is like there's no entanglement at all, or the entanglement is log n, or the entanglement is like polylog n. Although these are all like very small entanglements, but the problem between like the hardness of these three cases are drastically different, I think.
If there's no other question, I can continue asking.
Go for it.
So part of it was, part of the complicatedness also came from the fact that you wanted to ensure this across all cuts, right? Otherwise, I could have just done the trick of like idling the clock and ensuring that the state that I get is almost completely like the ground state, and then there would exist a certain cut such that close to n is also close to t. Is that right?
Sorry, could you? I'm not sure I totally understand the construction. Could you please say that again?
I was thinking about these clock idling strategies. No, maybe that doesn't work. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's right. I'll just pass. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to discuss with you offline.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for the talk. Is there an easy way to see how higher dimension cases are always going to be as hard as the low dimension cases? Because maybe I missed it, but so it seems like the 1D result and the 2D results were kind of like separate things. But can you? Maybe there's like a more direct way of connecting, like or relating them, or bounding one from another.
I do think that the hardness from lower dimension to higher dimension should be not hard, and I think this construction, say, or this 2D, like stacking the states construction can also work for like 3D or even higher cases. But on the top of my head, I'm not aware of like simpler ways to imply this hardness. But I think that's totally possible.
I see. Because it's kind of a physically natural thing
Yeah.
to expect, and I was wondering if it's also easy for to prove that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question.
Let me maybe ask one last question. So you said you switched to this like QTM construction rather than the Kitaev clock construction because it's like makes it easier to play with the entanglement structure. So is there some intuition for that? Because nobody likes QTMs, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think I don't know. It's just somehow like the not only for entanglement, but these QTM constructions also have like translation invariant, which is also we don't know how to do that in circuit model. So yeah, if we can, yeah, I think it would be really interesting if one can come up with a circuit to Hamiltonian constructions that not only entanglement but also have these other nice properties. Yeah, that could save us a lot of work, I think.
Okay. If there are no further questions, let's thank Chenyi again and all the speakers of this session.